Welcome to Psalms Layer by Layer, a project of Cambridge Digital Bible Research. Today, we present our second attempt, V2, at an at-a-glance view of Psalm 6. The purpose of the at-a-glance is to capture the inner logic of a psalm, what makes it tick. It's the starting place to learn about a psalm. Here, for Psalm 6, we begin with the title, The Sound of My Weeping. These are words taken directly from the Hebrew that capture something of the mood and content. Psalm 6 is about weeping in a fairly significant way, from the tears of one man to the watery chaos of Sheol, which was how the ancient world understood the world apart from the world of the living. We start with the plea, which introduces why the psalmist even bothered to compose this psalm. He was asking for help. His plea was, Lord, have mercy on me. Well, we have to ask, why would David, who is named in the superscription of this psalm, be asking for mercy? The answer comes from background assumptions, cultural information that would have been obvious to the original listeners. First, David, the author of this psalm, is a king. And in Israel, the king was considered God's son. We know that fathers discipline their sons when they disobey. If this sounds odd, recall 2 Samuel 7, in which God says explicitly, I will be his, as in the king's, father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him. This means if David is asking for mercy, and specifically mercy from discipline or punishment, as the psalm explicitly says in verse 2, the automatic assumption is that David had sinned, and the Lord is disciplining him for his sin. This is important. One indication of how desperate a plea is whether or not it is repeated. This plea is repeated in nearly lockstep, verses 2 through 4, repeated in verses 5 and 6. Lord, rescue me. That love, you may have noticed in 2 Samuel 7, is specifically mentioned here in the cry for rescue. The core of this plea plus repeat is verse 4, which cries out, My soul is deeply dismayed. Lord, how long? This is in red here because it lays the groundwork for what the rest of the psalm is going to do. All right, spoiler alert, God does answer. But what ends up being the interest of the psalm is not whether or not he answers, but the circumstances and the ramifications of the answer. More red text, which will clue us in. When God answers, David says, My enemies will be deeply dismayed in an instant. Is this the answer you'd have expected to the plea? Where did the enemies suddenly come from? More background information needed. Sickness was understood as a common form of divine punishment, and it was interpreted as a sign of divine rejection. Remember John 9 and how Jesus handled this in his day. The key to divine rejection meant that the king might no longer be protected by God, which would afford opportunity to his enemies, who would always be lying in wait, seeking opportunity to seize power. We therefore see a bit more of the background. David sinned, the Lord disciplined, and enemies approached to take advantage of the situation. They're mentioned in verse 8 first, but then addressed in verse 9. Now we get to the dark part of the psalm, between the plea and the answer. David weeps, I'm fading away. It's as if he's sinking into death. Not exactly indicative of a successful plea. Look at all the instances of the name of the Lord here in red. The plea and repeat both have it, actually more times than shown here. The answer as well has it, actually 3 times. But the middle dark portion doesn't. What's going on? Verse 6 has the answer, introducing this section. In the world of the dead, the Lord's name is not mentioned. Flipped around, where the name of the Lord is not mentioned, you're cut off from God. And the definition of that is death. In poetic terms, what we have between the plea and the answer is a picture of death. a living death, if you will, but a place cut off from God. This makes more sense of the imagery in verses 7 through 8. Sheol, the place of the dead, was understood as a watery chaos. And here David is flooding his bed, making it float in tears, and wearing out his eye from sobbing. Just as the waters of chaos flooded the earth in Noah's day, they're threatening David in this poem. Time to walk through the actual text. We start with the initial plea, crying for mercy. Lord, please do not let it be in your anger that you punish me. Do not let it be in your wrath that you discipline me. Have mercy on me, Lord. I'm languishing. Heal me, Lord. My body's dismayed. As for my soul, it is deeply dismayed. As for you, Lord, how long? And next is the repeat. Relent, Lord, rescue my soul. Help me for the sake of your loyalty. That's the love. For in the world of the dead, there's no commemoration of you. In the world of the dead, who praises you? Now's the wasting away, near death. Note the first appearance of adversaries. I have grown weary because of my groaning. Every night I drench my bed. With my tears I drench my bed. My eye has wasted away on account of vexation. It's become weak because of all my adversaries. Finally, the vindication. If you have whiplash from the sudden change, you're in good company. Get away from me, all you depraved people, for the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord will accept my prayer. Let all my enemies be shamed and deeply dismayed. Let them turn and be shamed in an instant. Let's take stock of the main movements within the psalm. There's a reversal and unexpected answer to the initial plea. David cried out that he was deeply dismayed, and he asked God, how long? Presumably, how long he would have to suffer. The answer is not directly about David's own healing. It actually skips over that and jumps to his vindication before his enemies. And it's now the enemies who will be deeply dismayed. In fact, this will be no leisurely activity, but in an instant. David goes from near despair to triumphant vindication in a heartbeat. You have to ask, how did that happen? This is the heart of the psalm. David felt himself near death. He felt cut off from God. He described himself as actually generating those waters of chaos with his own tears. His plea was going unanswered. But even in the depths of despair, when he could no longer even say God's name, he was not actually cut off from God. Death was not strong enough to prevent God from answering him and vindicating him. In the end, the anguish and despair, the result of God's discipline, did not last. But not only did they not last, when they ended, there was a complete turning of the tables. God did not discipline in order to weaken and diminish. He disciplined and even brought low into a kind of death in order to then vindicate and restore to a power of authority and strength. This completes the Psalm at a glance for Psalm 6. Thank you for watching, and you can visit us if you like at www.cdbr.org.